Euromaidan was a wave of demonstrations and civil unrest in Ukraine, which began on the night of the 21st of November 2013 with public protests in Maidan Nezalezhnosti in Kiev, demanding closer European integration. The scope of the protests expanded, with many calls for the resignation of President Viktor Yanukovych and his government. The protests ultimately led to the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. Many protesters joined because of the violent dispersal of protesters on the 30th of November and a will to change life in Ukraine. By the 25th of January 2014, the protests had been fueled by the perception of widespread government corruption, abuse of power, and violation of human rights in Ukraine. The protests reached a climax during mid-February. Police and protesters fired guns with both live and rubber ammunition in multiple locations in Kiev. The riot police advanced towards Maidan and clashed with the protesters but did not fully occupy it. The fights continued throughout the following days, during which the vast majority of casualties took place. In connection with the tragic events of February 18–20, Yanukovych was forced to make concessions to the opposition to end the bloodshed in Kiev and end the sharp political crisis. The agreement on settlement of political crisis in Ukraine was signed by Vitaly Klitschko, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, Oleh Tyahnybok. The signing was witnessed by the foreign ministers of Germany and Poland, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Radoslaw Sikorski, respectively, and the director of the Continental Europe Department of the French Foreign Ministry, Eric Fournier. Vladimir Lukin, representing Russia, refused to sign the agreement. In late February 2014, Yanukovych and many other high government officials fled the country. Protesters gained control of the presidential administration and Yanukovych's private estate. A while later, the parliament removed Yanukovych from office, replaced the government with a pro-European one, and ordered that Yulia Tymoshenko be released from prison. In the aftermath, the Crimean crisis began amid pro-Russian unrest. Despite the controversial impeachment of Yanukovych, the installation of a new government, and the signature of the political provisions of the Ukraine-EU Association Agreement, the protests have been ongoing to sustain pressure on the government, counter pro-Russian protests, and reject Russian occupation of Ukraine. The general area of the pro-Ukraine and pro-Europe protests has shifted from Kiev and western Ukraine to include the eastern and southern areas of the country as well. Overview. The demonstrations began on the night of the 21st of November 2013, when protests erupted in the capital, Kiev, after the Ukrainian government suspended preparations for signing the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement with the European Union to seek closer economic relations with Russia. On the 24th of November 2013, clashes between protesters and police began. Protesters strived to break cordon. Police used tear gas and batons. Protesters also used tear gas and some firecrackers. After a few days of demonstrations, an increasing number of university students joined the protests. The Euromaidan has been repeatedly characterized as an event of major political symbolism for the European Union itself, particularly as the largest ever pro-European rally in history. The protests continued despite heavy police presence, regularly sub-freezing temperatures, and snow. Escalating violence from government forces in the early morning of the 30th of November caused the level of protests to rise, with 400,000–800,000 protesters, according to Russia's opposition politician Boris Nemtsov, demonstrating in Kiev on the weekends of the 1st of December and the 8th of December. In the preceding weeks, protest attendance had fluctuated from 50,000 to 200,000 during organized rallies. Violent riots took place the 1st of December and the 19th of January through the 25th of January in response to police brutality and government repression. Starting the 23rd of January, several western Ukrainian oblasts, governor buildings and regional councils were occupied in a revolt by Euromaidan activists. In the Russophone cities of Zaporizhzhia, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk, protesters also tried to take over their local government building, and were met with considerable force from both police and government supporters. According to journalist Lesha Bushak writing in the 18th of February 2014 issue of Newsweek magazine, Euromaidan had grown into something far bigger than just an angry response to the fallen-through EU deal. It's now about ousting Yanukovych and his corrupt government, guiding Ukraine away from its 200-year-long, deeply intertwined and painful relationship with Russia, and standing up for basic human rights to protest, speak and think freely and to act peacefully without the threat of punishment. A turning point came in late February, when enough members of the president's party fled or defected for the party to lose its majority in parliament, leaving the opposition large enough to form the necessary quorum. This allowed Parliament to pass a series of laws that removed police from Kiev, cancelled anti-protest operations, restored the 2004 constitution, freed political detainees, and removed President Yanukovych from office. Yanukovych then fled to Ukraine's second-largest city of Kharkiv, refusing to recognize the parliament's decisions. The parliament assigned early elections for May 2014.